We built this city and they are destroying it. Those people, those terrible people, we have a bad name for them. Hi, my name is Chris and I used to be a content moderator for Facebook. And today we're looking at a decision of Facebook's Oversight Board, which really examines what you can say about your enemies and where we're going to draw the line about what's not acceptable. So before we talk about the case, let's just talk about the background, which involves two countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan. And these are places I know nothing about whatsoever, so we have to do a little bit of history. Now, they have a very rich and long cultural history going back thousands of years, but more recently they were taken over by the Russians in the 19th century, and then they were part of the Soviet Union until the early 1990s when the Soviet Union collapsed. Now, at that time, these two new countries were born. They had to draw a border between them, and some of the people in one region within Azerbaijan identified themselves as Armenian, and they've insisted that they are Armenians and not Azerbaijanis ever since. And that's created a lot of tension, and in September 2020 that actually erupted into a war. People were fighting each other with guns and bombs and also with words. There was a lot of arguing on social media. Poor old Facebook was in the middle trying to do content moderation in 3 different languages. We've got Azerbaijani, Armenian and Russian all being used by people on both sides of this dispute. So it was quite a challenging situation. So what happened in this case? Well, it started in November of 2020 when somebody posted some photographs of churches in this breakaway region of Azerbaijan and said that these have been built by Armenian people and they're being destroyed by Azerbaijanis. Azerbaijanis are nomads, they have no history, no culture, and he also added some hashtags describing Azerbaijanis as vandals and aggressive towards the Armenian people, and another one calling for the recognition of this state that has declared itself as separate from Azerbaijan. And this post was seen by about 45,000 people. Then Facebook deleted the post, not because of the argument that he was making and what he'd said about the actions of the Azerbaijani people, but because of the word that he used to describe them. Apparently he called them taziki, which in Russian I understand to be a slur against Azerbaijani people. Now the user then went off and reposted the same comment multiple times. Facebook deleted it again and again, but they didn't ban the user. Anyway, eventually he came to the Oversight Board complaining that his freedom of speech had been taken away, and then the Oversight Board has decided to take a look. So what are the issues that we have to consider in this case? Well, the first one, as ever, is this idea of a protected characteristic, something like your nationality, your ethnicity, your gender, sexual orientation, religion, anything that's central to your identity. And any kind of attack or statement of inferiority or exclusion towards somebody based on their protected characteristic, well, that counts as hate speech and has to be deleted. Now, in this case, we've got this claim about the Azerbaijanis having no culture, they're nomads, no history, etc. We've also got the use of this alleged slur, taziki. So that brings us to the next question. Well, who actually decides what's a slur, what is insulting, what's demeaning, and what's just good fun, what's acceptable? Now, Facebook actually keeps a list in every language of designated slurs, designated demeaning comparisons, things that you're not allowed to say. And of course, that's constantly updated all of the time. It's worth noting that in this case, the user didn't just use the word, he actually spelt it out letter by letter with a full stop between each one, which is a common tactic of people who are trying to bypass any automated monitoring system. They're hoping that the artificial intelligence won't see what they've done by changing the spelling slightly. And then the final question you have to think about is, this was happening in the middle of a real shooting war. And when people use inflammatory language in difficult times like this, well, it just incites people to be more extreme. It creates more violence. It leads to more trouble. So we have to ask, Well, should Facebook have extra rules in these situations? And if so, well, what happens when the situation calms down again? Does that mean that posts that were deleted are now allowed back? Or what about posts that were made long before the trouble started? Do we have to go back and retroactively moderate everybody's conversations over the last 20 years because now they're fighting with each other and we don't want them to see anything offensive? Also, what about people who are not in the region but might have an opinion? I mean, last year there was a lot of worry about the American election. Well, are people in Zimbabwe allowed to have an opinion about that? Or are we going to say, no, we're going to have to put a damper on all the discussions to try and stop the situation getting out of control? So there's a real thorny issue here of when does free speech have to be moderated to try and prevent a situation getting out of hand, and where do we draw the barriers? Where are the parameters of that decision? So before we get to the board's decision, let's just take a moment to critique a few things that happened during the process of the investigation. And the first one is that the general public are always invited to comment on any ongoing cases. Anyone can go to the Oversight Board's website and take a look at what cases are in progress, and if they feel they have something to say about it, then they can go right ahead. And in this case, quite a few users commented about the historical accuracy of the claim, about whether this was a valid debate about the relative cultures of the two sides in the argument. And that's all well and good, but they seem to be ignoring the fact that the post was deleted because the guy used a slur. And this is quite interesting because it shows that the way that people are thinking about these questions, even when you see clearly this is not allowed, they're going to say, oh yes, but we're talking about this. And they're not listening to the reasons that you give them. And the next issue that came up is the user statement. The person who made the report, the complaint about being deleted, well, they've also submitted a statement to the board, and they've said, and I'll quote, they said that their post was not hate speech but was intended to demonstrate the destruction of Baku's cultural and religious heritage. So yeah, this is again talking about what I said, not how I said it, the content of the post and not the words that I used, trying to divert attention away from the fact that he used a slur to describe the other people. They also claimed that the post was only removed because Azerbaijani users who have, and I quote, hate towards Armenia and Armenians are reporting content posted by Armenians. So basically he's saying that I've done nothing wrong, these are bad people and they hate me, and they're using the reporting tool as a weapon against me as part of their campaign to destroy my churches and destroy my people and blah blah blah. This is somebody who has a real grievance. He really feels like he's being oppressed, not only by those people but also by Facebook. Remember, he kept repeating this post every time it was deleted. He put it back up again. He feels like he's being denied his freedom of speech on something that's really important to him. Having said that, yes, you feel like you've got a legitimate gripe, but let's not forget that this guy repeatedly used a slur and tried to disguise it by using this T.A. blah 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 method to try and hide it from any automated systems. So he knew he was using a slur and he kept using it even though he knew that that was the problem. And that brings me on to my final critique. When Facebook deleted the post, they didn't say it's because you're using a slur and that's the reason. So they've left him some wriggle room to argue that they're trying to prevent his free speech. And they've kind of made it look like Facebook supports the other side. They are taking sides in the argument because they didn't state clearly what the problem was, even though the guy really knew. So that was a mistake by Facebook, I think, a bit of a misstep. So, what was the final decision of the Oversight Board on this case? Well, the Oversight Board decided that using a slur is not permitted, and therefore Facebook had made the right decision. And I think I agree with them as well. Interestingly, they didn't say that the post should have been deleted because of the commentary about Azerbaijani people having no culture or being nomads, etc. This kind of robust discussion is still permitted on Facebook. And interestingly, there was some dissent within the board. There were some members, I don't know who, they're not identified, who felt that because of this valid discussion about what was going on and about the destruction of culture, then it was okay to let this use of the slur, to let it slide. And actually the phrase used by the board in their decision was that the use of the slur was not incidental. It wasn't something that just slipped in. It was deliberate by the user. So I think I'm going to agree with that one. Now, these dissenting voices, though, that's an interesting argument, because they're saying that if you've got a grievance, if you feel that you've got a legitimate complaint about other people, well, then you're allowed to insult them. You're allowed to use a slur. And I think that's a very slippery slope to go down, because for the content moderators actually processing hundreds of these decisions every hour, then that's a really difficult decision to make. You're going to have people having different opinions, and that means that you're not going to get the same result each time. Now, bear in mind, this user reposted the same comment over and over, and if it gets seen by different people and they have this flexibility, some of them are going to delete it and some of them are going to leave it up. So I think that this argument is something that's not going to be implementable at scale. Also, they suggested that instead of just deleting the post, Facebook should have tried to maybe suppress it so that not so many people would see it, or they should have promoted the counter argument, which makes me wonder how many people are going to be posting in Russian in support of the Azerbaijani perspective on this kind of thing. It all just seems a little bit messy. And anyway, you're asking Facebook then to take sides in an argument. You're asking them, actually it's a shooting war, and you're asking them to say that I want you to listen to what this guy's got to say now, and I'm going to hide what this guy is saying. So that all seems very messy. I think that some of the members of the board at this time were confusing the principle of what's okay with the process of how you deal with it. And we need a little bit more clarity about what's okay before we start having these conversations. Now, bear in mind, this decision was actually made about a year ago, and I'm working my way through the back catalogue now. So we might look in a few weeks and see if their thinking has moved on in these kind of situations. But at least at the moment, I think we're all in agreement, the majority of us certainly, that you can't use a slur if you want to discuss what's happening to your people or what's being done by other people. Oh, and one more thing. Now, the board also made a recommendation to Facebook about the way that they interact with their users. And they argued that in this case, Facebook has created an adversarial relationship with the user because they don't explain clearly what went on, what the decision making was, and what the problem was that caused them to delete the post. They've left the user free to argue that Facebook is taking sides in an argument and is not being even-handed or fair, because they didn't say you used a slur and that's not allowed. Now, as I've said, I think the user actually knew that the slur was not permitted, but still the onus is on Facebook to be more transparent with people and more empathic, more engaged, rather than just making this process totally opaque and difficult for anybody to understand. It leads to bad feeling, it leads to resistance, it leads to people reposting their argument because they can't see what's wrong with it. So I think that's a really important insight from the board there about the way that Facebook does things. So there we go. That was a pretty good result. The board agreed with Facebook. Facebook agreed with me. I agreed with the original content moderator. You can't use a slur even if you think you have a valid grievance that needs to be shared with the world. You have to keep it civil, guys. So if you disagree, or even if you do agree, please feel free, get down into the comments there, tell me what you think, keep it civil, and I'll talk to you next week. I have been Chris, this has been Oversight Examined, and I look forward to the next one.